This is Duke University.
It still is the view of ritual, the popular view, and even the academic view, that ritual is stodgy, unchanging, stereotyped, so on. You can find all that list of adjectives not only in the media, but you can often find it with among scholars even. And I've spent most of my academic life pitted against that particular view. So much of my research has focused on the problem of ritual creativity and ritual criticism. Both phrases, many of my colleagues assure me, are strange as purple ideas or songful bananas. They're contradictions in terms. But I coined those ideas not thinking they were controversial and not thinking that I was theorizing much. I thought I was describing an actual fact that I kept observing when I started doing field work on the Santa Fe Fiesta in 1973. What I thought I was observing was people making stuff up, changing stuff, editing stuff. What I thought I observed, what I overheard, were people criticizing the mass, the dances, the songs, the fiesta in general. So what I thought I was hearing, what I thought I was seeing was creativity and criticism simply as an obvious fact in front of my face. But when I began to write about these things, many people assured me that it was not an obvious fact and that ritual was not like that. And I had many arguments with Roy Rappaport, who's a friend and perpetual arguing partner, whose view of ritual is absolutely unlike mine, partly because he picked the Shema as his example, old, 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 and never changing much, according to him. And I was working on the Santa Fe Fiesta, and I was always looking at rituals' interface with the arts. So when I was hired, I was not hired like I still am in a religious studies department, so I was not hired to do Islam or Christianity or Judaism or Buddhism. I was hired to boundary hop. So my job description actually was religion and the arts. And my job was to constantly be crossing, transcending, transgressing those various boundaries. My training as a religious studies scholar was fairly classical. It was all pretty much philosophical, theological. It was pretty much all textual. We learned what we learned by reading books, discussing and debating. So the methods were largely historical, philosophical, and literary critical. But just as I started writing my dissertation, something grabbed me. My joke was I wrote my dissertation on William Blake. They allowed me to do that. And somebody said, "Why do you want to do that?" And I said, "Because there are pictures and it'll keep me awake." I was joking, but I was also telling the truth. So I already began to make a kind of literary turn as I was exiting graduate school. A couple of years into my first appointment, I tried to teach a course on myth and ritual. The myth part worked, the ritual part didn't. And I thought, well, why is that? Because I don't know anything about ritual. So an anthropologist friend of mine said, "Have you ever heard of Victor Turner?" I said, "No, who's that?" So I went and read all of Vic Turner's books, and then I drove down the road to Chicago, and he said, "Oh, I know you." And I said, "No, you don't." He said, "Yeah, I do." I said, "How do you?" He said, "Your dissertation. I'm using your dissertation." I said, "Nobody reads dissertations." And he said, "Well," I said, "What's the course?" He said, "Urban anthropology." I said, "What?" He says, "Yeah, all this stuff about Blake and the vision of the city. Yeah, I know about your dissertation." He says, "Come on down and join us. Saul Bellow is sitting in." At the time, I didn't know who Saul Bellow was. Anyway, I was there a few months, and Vic turned me out. He said, "This is no good. This is not the way to do this. You don't need to be sitting on these courses. You need to get your tail out of here and go do field work." I said, "Well, how do you do that?" He said, "You'll figure it out." So I made a turn in the direction of anthropology, ethnography, and field work. I felt good about it, but I also felt a little lonely because no other religious studies scholars were doing it as far as I knew. And I continued to do that for 35 years or so. And mainly I was going and taking notes in order to write books. And then something happened in 2007, and basically it was I went back to Santa Fe again. This is across a 35-year period. And I thought, I can't keep up with this. Maybe I was aging, but the fiesta was sprawling and too much was going on simultaneously. I couldn't keep up with it. So I said to a friend of mine, I said, this is not working. We cannot study ritual this way. And he said, what do you think we should do? And I said, well, we get cameras. And so in 2007, several of us began to make a turn using videographic methods and reading visual anthropology and so on to try to study ritual. And we made a little pact to teach each other. So since 2007 to now, I have my elevator pitch about myself is I'm a religious studies scholar who acts a lot like an anthropologist and carries a camera. So I decided, one other thing before I show you this. This particular project is a fairly new project. It's on an arts collective in Montreal called Native Immigrant. And the premise is that there's a kind of special affinity between Native people and recent immigrants. That is to say, not the English speakers and not the French speakers, but the others. That's not my premise, that's the premise of the artistic director. Anyway, I've been tracking this group and studying this group. They do two kinds of things. One is they ritualize a lot of their art production. So it's one of the kinds of groups that I would follow. Often I've done this in theater. I've not often done it with people who are painters and sculptors and so on. So sometimes they are ritualizing their own artistic production. And at other times, they are either facilitating or creating rituals. That's why I'm studying this group. So now I'll show you the film.
I want it to be like very clear and real, like I guess to the degree that I felt you would understand. You know, I was reading like the day it happened, like how to break the news like a toddler. I had my mother-in-law that was with my daughter since like day one. I kept reading, you have to explain it from a physical point of view. That you know, her mom is no longer weird, yeah. Wait, on you go. Yeah, that her mom was no longer like walking, breathing, able to eat.
So we will dust each of your ears so that you will hear again the voice of the water, the voice of the children, the voice of the birds, the voices of the trees.
Inside his big arms, press me tight against his heart, my heart. Let me hold my father again, for I died for him today already. Yesterday. and two scribbles unfold again. No official head nods, just a young so many pass through that same door again and again, waving goodbye, adios, a smile, bye, oh God, bye. Waving goodbye, adios, a smile, bye, oh God, bye.
I almost threw this footage out. For one thing, when I went on the walk with Stefan, the premise was that he was going to show me where the ceremony was going to happen, that was all. And the other premise was that he was going to help me test equipment, because I had been drafted into shooting this. They had fired the official filmmaker the day before, and the artistic director came to me and she said, "You do rituals, you do camera, right? Can you do this?" And I said, "Are you kidding?" And she said, "No, we can borrow equipment." I said, I tell them, first rule of field work is don't ever use borrowed or new equipment when you do field work. She said, "Please." And I said, "Okay, fine." So Stefan was showing me the place where he and Miriam had had many of their important conversations and where the condolence ceremony was to be performed the next day. So he has the mic on, but the mic is shorting out and most of the audio footage is gone. And the camera, I realized later, it took me a while, that I was cradling the camera. I just had it on, but I felt I couldn't bring myself to use it. So the tech agenda sort of got flushed as he and I were trading stories about childhood and deaths of children and spouses and so on. So the tech agenda, as you can see, pretty much got lost. But the camera was on most of the time, and so was an audio recorder. So when I looked at all this, I just started to toss it. But I had been asked to shoot the ceremony, so if you want to talk about the politics performance, you have to ask two things. What are a Muslim and Jew doing getting married? And two, what are Mohawks doing crossing the river and putting the condolence ceremony in this way? I mean, the condolence is an old and very complex ceremony, and most of the time it is not performed among non-native people. And what's a white guy doing shooting this particular ritual and putting it up on YouTube? So if you want to talk about the political questions, we can open those questions up. I didn't really figure out until I was almost finished with this. I thought, who am I making this for? I thought, well, I'm making it for Carolina. She's the director of Native Immigrant. I thought, well, I'm making it for her because she asked me to do it. And then on the walk, I began to think, and as I was shooting, I thought, no, I'm making it for Stefan, the dad, the husband, because I was identified with him. So I thought, how can I get through this? I'll make it for him. But then halfway through, my daughter came into play, and his daughter was my daughter. And then I realized, I was carrying the camera the way the teddy monkey is passing back and forth. So then I realized later, I thought, I'm carrying the camera the same way. It's just sort of sitting here stupidly on my arm, you can see it bouncing around. So I started to throw it all out. But then something happened, and I went, disoriented camera, spiritual turmoil, and then it all clicked. And then I went, Aaliyah. She barely has any idea what's going on, but she will. So after it was made, I sent it back, of course, to Stefan, and I sent it out to Philip Deering, Mohawk, and so on, and said, what do you think? So the first email I got back said, "Oh God, oh God, oh God, Carolina." I thought, oh shit, I'm in serious trouble. Actually, I wasn't in serious trouble. She was happy with the film. So anyway, and then Stefan sent me a note, and he said, "Can I have this for Aaliyah?" And I said, well, of course, it's made for Aaliyah. He said, so when she comes of age, I'll do two things. He said, I'm sending her email notes every day into a secret account. And when she turns 18, she'll get all those emails. And then the second thing is I will show her the film. So anyway, it's kind of a film for the future. I should say, then I'll stop. There are two other versions of this film. I made this one first, and then I thought, because I'm a filmmaking academic, and I think this way, I thought, okay, this is not very ethnographic. So I sat down and I made 2 other more ethnographic, I just mean like Carl Heider style ethnographic, which is to say, don't mess around with your footage too much. So the other 2 versions are in color. They're more linear. They're more straight. You follow things from beginning to end. You don't get this kind of displacement and overlay that I'm doing here. But anyway, later we can come to, if you want, the politics of this performance. Thank you.
Produced by Duke University. Online at duke.edu.